see it. We love to see it.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Swerve Tech channel, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about everything you should consider or know or think about whenever you're wanting to do a Om617 swap into whatever rig you have. This one is a 95 Ford Ranger. Things you should know before you start the process or even begin to start the process on swapping this engine into your rig. So here we go. Alright, so I guess the first thing we can start off with is the power. These things came with about 125 or so horsepower from the factory back in 84, 85, give or take. So people will swap these things in 40 years old now and then expect them to have 200-300 horsepower when they only had 125 factory. People complain about them, saying they're a slow dog, they have no power, it's not fun to drive, and then they just give up on the build or sell it or do whatever with it because they just get no joy out of driving it. So the first thing you want to look into is refreshing the engine, meaning new sleeves, new bearings, new rings, getting the head checked, getting the head resurfaced, new valve guides, new valve seals, all the gaskets, the rope seal in the back. Just go through all that stuff so you have a fresh engine to start with. And then once you get it in there, what I did was I got the engine in there, got it running, got all the bugs worked out that I could find or come across. And then once I got to that point, then I looked into getting a different turbo, and I went with the whole set HE221 with the 5.5 centimeter squared exhaust housing. That one so far has done me plenty well. Once I got that on and got all the oil lines fit how I wanted to and got the charge pipes and stuff like that done and the exhaust routed, then I went over to Ben's Force again, which I reached out to them for the turbo, and they made the adapter right there because the HE221 is I believe it's called a T25, and the factory fit manifold is a T3. And then once I got the turbo on there and got everything running tip top, got everything all good, then I gave them a call and got this injection pump. These injection pumps on these things, people will always say, because they, I guess, think it's a Cummins or something, that you can just take a little cap off here, screw that in, and maybe there's something else on the back and maybe something somewhere else that you can just magically adjust and then you get all the power in the world. But 99% of the time, every single person that adjusts those, they always go back to the forums and say, hey, why does my rig not run right? Why is it like idling super hard? It's not fun to drive. It's super smoky on idle. It's just a nightmare. And then whenever you go to send a pump off to get it rebuilt or recalibrated, they don't like dealing with those, from my understanding, because they've been modified and they can't put out more fuel because the elements aren't changed. All they did was change the settings on it, which they're fine-tuned to run at optimal performance. So if you're going to look into getting more power out of it rather than have like 120 horsepower or whatever, then the pump is definitely the way to go, as well as a turbo and a way to cool that hot air. So what we did, I really need to move that bush that I yanked out of the yard. So what we did is got this water to air intercooler, and to cool the water, which we're using coolant, we have a 800 gallon per hour bilge pump in here, just a Walmart bilge pump. And then we have a radiator from a side-by-side off of eBay. And luckily it already had this little bend right here, so it fits real good. And then we just drilled some holes and ran some lines, and I'll try to drop a video right here of driving going 65 and then full throttle up to say 75 and then just maintain 75, the EGTs will go from say 800 to 1200 because it's full throttle, full fuel, 15 psi of boost. And then as soon as I let off, it'll pretty fast come back down to 800 EGTs again, which is pretty decent for this thing being lifted as high as it is on 37s, but it's only geared for 35, so it's still under a load more than it should be, but it still does great. So the next thing we're going to talk about is cooling. These things can definitely heat up coolant like a nuclear reactor. I know a lot of people don't think about the cooling whenever they're thinking about a swap. And as far as a radiator or a radiator shroud or cooling fans, or they want to go electric fans because it's tight on room because these engines are so long. I mean, like, back of the valve cover is almost to the firewall. And I already moved the radiator, which used to be going from here forward. And I have just enough room with trimming the fan blade. I still need to get a shroud on here. Down here in Florida, if it's, say, 85 degrees outside and it's just idling, this engine can overheat up to, I say overheat, it'll get up to close to 200, 210. But if I'm cruising down the road under a load or just cruising 70, 65, it'll maintain 180 all day long. I believe the thermostat's for like 182 degrees. Could be wrong on that. But yeah, once I got, this is a, I believe it's called a biflow or double pass, whatever, where it goes over and down and then back over. But this one's out of a Mustang. I think it's like a 65. This one's done really good. And then I just have a little cheap Amazon overflow tank. And then we got cooling, power, and fueling out of the way. Another thing to think about is your power steering. I'm running the factory power steering pump from a SD, I believe it is, which is the wagon from my understanding. The return line, I just have an adapter right here that goes from this bigger size to the smaller size, which just goes to my Toyota gearbox. And then for the pressure side, I got a fitting that just goes in there, so that was pretty easy. And the fitting down there on the Toyota gearbox as well. So that got that out of the way. I thought I was going to be fighting with that, thinking that this pump wouldn't be sufficient. It would not be sufficient enough on 35s. But at idle, I can turn the wheels with a little bit of pressure applied. Nothing crazy like full hydro or anything like that. But yeah, that is good. Another thing, I'll go back to cooling real quick. Some people, they say you can go to a different year, or model water pump pulley, which is a little bit smaller, which in return would spin the water faster. But there's pluses and minuses to that. So do your research on cooling going too fast and not getting enough time to cool down per se. Another thing, I guess it would go with cooling somewhat, is the oil cooler and the oil filter housing. So I know it's a nightmare back here because I have all this wiring and I don't have the wiper motor in right now, but the filter housing itself is tight on the firewall. You see I had to massage there pretty gnarly with a pipe and a hammer just so I could get the filter housing cover off to get the filter out to change the oil filter. But I have them AN lines and adapters. Ben's Force keeps those in stock, and then I just ran that up here to a pretty big oil cooler, and that just goes back through there. The oil temperature, because I have oil temperature, coolant temperature, and I think that's it for my temperatures. if my coolant temp is 185, my oil temperature is about 150, 160, about 20-25 degrees apart from each other. So this cooler is doing plenty good. I imagine when I get a shroud on here, it'll just be that much better. Another thing to consider whenever doing these swaps is another noisy diesel driving, is that these are front sump engines. So I trimmed my cross member. Probably not advisable to do, especially since I haven't really reinforced it back up, but so far, knock on wood, I haven't had any issues with that being trimmed at all. But yeah, you can see the oil pan. This is a factory oil pan, I think from like Pelican parts or something, bolted on there. It fits good. And while we're right here, we can talk about charging. So a lot of people, whenever they do a swap, I don't know if they ever consider about charging our alternators or what they need to do, but we are running an alternator off of let's see if I can get it in here. It is off of a 2005 Chevy 1500. I went to the junkyard and got a plug that fits on there. It's pretty tight on the frame right here. I should probably notch it out, but it's been fun. But I went to the junkyard, got a plug, looked up the wiring schematics on that, and with this little bitty wire going to the post and then the wires all hooked up, this thing charges at about 14.5 volts. Also, the pulley for that alternator from the factory is a regular belt, and then this one I swapped over the factory Mercedes V-belt pulley to it, and it fit perfect. I believe I may have had to add a washer, but I don't recall. But for the factory bracket, let's see if I can get it here good. So the factory bracket, I just trimmed a little bit so that the bolt with that nut right there, that bolt that goes through, the spacing had to be opened up because like that spacing in that slot where it rides had to be opened up. And other than that, it was basically a direct fit. Like I said, it charges 14.5 volts while driving. And I also got a tachometer feed off of that. Oh, let me zoom back out. So I got my tach, got plenty of power, and it also has a sense wire. I did hook up the sense wire, so whenever it senses a big draw, it will compensate and then charge at peak charging, whatever that may be. It's probably 14.5 volts, but yeah, so that's out of the way. Charges great. I have a Marine deep cycle. This is probably battery number 5. Since I don't want to run 2 batteries, this one was dying sometimes, so I added a master shutoff switch. It's a Stinger SGP32. So I just kill power to everything whenever I'm not using it, and whenever I get in, I just flip a switch and it's good to go. Speaking of power, another thing is the glow plugs. So the glow plugs on an older engine, they'll be all clogged up with like nasty old grimy soot and stuff, and they'll be like almost stuck in the head. So one thing you can do is, if you're able to even remove them, which you can usually work them back and forth and spray a bunch of like brake clean and then finally get it freed up, and then once they're out, then you could turn the engine over to push out any debris that's there, or you could vacuum it or like blow compressed air in there to try to get any contamination out. And then they sell a reamer that you can thread in there to clean all that debris out, and then do the same to get that stuff out of there. But to power my glow plugs, I have a Ford relay. It's just power straight from the battery and then power straight to all 5 wires. So I have all I forget what size wire I ran, maybe 10 gauge wire into one eyelet, and then the other end of the eyelet goes to my master shut-off switch, but it used to go straight to the battery. And to feed that relay, I have a little timer where I click a button and then it runs for 10 seconds and it shuts off automatically, or I can click it off at any given time. So yeah, it turns on great every single time I do the click it, wait 10 seconds. Once it clicks off, pushing the clutch, turn it on. And then to shut it off, all the overboost protection solenoid can be used to shut these engines off. It's extremely easy to wire up and run the lines to it. So I'll go ahead and say how to do that. I'm running the factory vacuum pump. It's mechanical in here. A lot of people don't like them. They say that they grenade and then send shrapnel to the engine. You can do your research on that, but I've had 0 issues with mine. So I'm trusting that for my brakes. I just have this little adapter here, and then a splice off there with a reducer. This goes to one side of the overboost protection switch, and then the other side goes to the back of the injection pump right here. And when the switch has power, it is closed, so vacuum can't go to the pump to shut the fuel off. So I just have that to a keyed hot wire from the truck, so whenever my key is on, it sends power to not allow vacuum through, and then whenever I shut the key off, then it loses power, and then the vacuum goes to the pump and shuts the fuel off. One issue that I've ran into with that is if I guess you have a good brake master cylinder, or sorry, a good brake booster, it'll hold vacuum. So if you shut it off and go to turn it right back on, I've had to pump the brakes to get rid of that excess vacuum and then cycle the key again so that it clears the held vacuum, I guess you would say. So yeah, we got the glow plugs, turning them on, shutting the engine off, wiring the glow plugs, cleaning out the glow plug holes, cooling, steering. The factory intakes on these things is a huge like swirl canister, and then the accumulated blow-by gets swirled around, hits the sides, turns into a liquid, and then can run back into the oil pan. Let's see if I can find it. But next to the drain, there's a little stubbed up piece, and that's where the oil would go that is accumulated from the intake swirl canister thing from the valve cover. That I just tapped it whenever I was rebuilding my engine and put an aluminum threaded NPT plug into it, and I've had 0 issues with it leaking or anything like that. And then the breather hose I have hooked up with a Venturi effect tube going into my exhaust, and it's worked great for me. So the next thing, a huge thing, would be starting. So starting these things with 21 to 1 compression or whatever it is, something really high. There's not really a good starter that has been found yet that's, I guess, trustworthy, you could say. You could just know, you could just get in, turn it on a million times and never have an issue like you would with a factory Mercedes starter. But with the Ford starter that I have with my adapter plate down there, I would say I'm probably on starter number 5. Granted, the first one I killed whenever I was getting this engine running, trying to get the fueling right, and then just working back and forth with it, and then just nature of the beast has wore it out. Granted, it could have been just a cheap reman starter. So in the second one, the mounting tab broke on it, and then the third one went out whenever I went to do an off-road recovery. I believe maybe some water got on it, and then it just sorted it out and welded itself on the inside. But so far, knock on wood, this one's been doing good. If I have any more issues, I believe I'll just let this one go to the trash can and then buy a gear reduction one and then try to go that route. But I've tried the heat blanket around it as well, and it is a known issue of trying to get a good, reliable, everyday, be able to go to the store and pick one up type of starter that you can just depend on, like as if it was just factory installed in here. So we'll go over here. Get up in this rig. Put it in neutral. Main power switch. Hit the glow plugs. You can see the baby sucks it down. Granted, this battery is not the best, probably. Turn it off. Get that garbage out of here. You can see it kind of struggled a little bit with the starter, but granted, the glow plugs are great. The holes are extremely clean, and they got warmed up. Everything is good. So let's go to the other side and we'll look at the rest of those gauges. But right now, we got oil temperature. Obviously it's cold. Oil pressure. These things can make up to 100 psi oil pressure. And we got 13 volts just sitting steady. So yeah, for the oil pressure, if you run an aftermarket turbo, you need to have a restrictor or a oil pressure bypass, because they will disintegrate or obliterate, I guess is a better word, the seals in the turbo. We got our boost, EGTs, and then we got water temp. And all these gauges are just for ships and giggles. The RPM gauge is a little bit off, but I do have a Dakota Digital. I've just never had anything to show me what the actual RPM of the engine is. This does work still, and then this one I just have grounded. This one is bad, and that one I do have working with my fuel cell in the bed. So yeah, you can turn the wheels with 37s. Don't mind the squeaking of that. So yeah, these things run great, runs amazing. Like I said, I fully rebuilt the engine. This is temporary. I do have a throttle mounting bracket that you'll be able to take off the factory setup, bolt mine on, and then it'll have full sweep of the throttle pedal, and everything will function like you'll be able to shut it off like this, like factory. I do have a little exhaust leak apparently. I'll have to dig into that soon. So all in all, as far as the swap goes on this thing, it didn't take terribly long. Let me shut this thing off and we'll keep on going over things to think about when swapping. So here's my stored vacuum. I just go like that a couple of times, cycle the key on and off, and then it's good to turn back on. So for getting your engine in a vehicle, you can obviously design your own brackets that bolt to the engine and then work off of that to your engine mounts that you choose to run. what I opted to do was just buy the plates that Ben's Force has already designed the bolt to it. They're already cut out with a CNC. They're going to be great. Slap them on, put your nuts on, and work off of that. That saved me a ton of time because I don't have like a drill press and anything crazy to get that stuff going. And then I just put a 3/8 plate on top with some gussets on top and bottom. I'm running the factory Ranger rubber mounts. Some people have issues with destroying mounts because of the vibrations and the torque that these things can create. So far, knock on wood, like I said, I've had no issues with engine mounts. One thing a lot of people did have issues with is adapter plates. I'm running one that a lot of people frown upon, but all those people that have them that have had issues with them have all been Toyotas or automatics, I believe, maybe a Jeep. But I'm running the Mercedes diesel 4x4 small block Ford adapter, and with that being said, they are no longer in business from my understanding because of the lack of standing behind their work with engines that they've destroyed because things weren't machined right. This one is literally three pieces of metal, 3 pieces of 3/16 metal, maybe a 1/4 inch thick, CNC cut out and then just pressed together and welded, and then just a crank adapter. But so far, knock on wood, I've had no issues with my adapter plate. All went on smooth. I've had measurements from other people that have created an adapter plate, and mine was like 0.00, like 2 or 3 maybe millimeters difference than what they had. And granted, I was measuring with a Harbor Fraud micrometer, so I would definitely look into paying whatever it costs to get a nice adapter plate that people talk good about, instead of saying that the measurements were all crazy and pushed the crank too far forward and just ate thrush bearings and all sorts of good stuff like that. Another thing you can do for keeping these things cool is water meth injection. If you take out this plug right here, it's a good spray, or at least I've had good luck with spraying through here on my 84 300D that I had prior to this. That kept the EGTs down, but granted, that was just with a all to delete and a factory turbo and factory application, nothing done to the engine whatsoever. If you plan to swap these engines in and you want great, dependable, reliable power, this thing can easily run 75 down the road on 37s. Granted, it's geared, but it's only geared for 35s, and I don't have overdrive. Then definitely look into buying a pump and a turbo and having a nice intake system. Definitely reach out to Ben's Force for the turbo and the injection pump. Other people sell them. They have their kits with their different off the shelf like eBay adapters. This one is engineered and designed by Ben's Force to accommodate proper airflow into the turbo and other things that are unaccounted for on other people's brackets, and his comes with all the bolts and the hardware and everything like that. He also has an adapter that can go into the intake. I believe it still offers it. And you slide it in the intake and use a wrench and you tighten it, and then it wedges against itself in the intake. And then you can easily run charge pipes off of it rather than having to take the intake off and have it welded by somebody. You can just put it on there, bolt it on, and be good to go. Another thing to look at when doing these engines is the boost feed off of the back of the intake of that little banjo bolt. Sometimes those can have so much gunk inside of the banjo fitting because of the EGR that would be right here. I have a non-EGR intake and exhaust manifold, thankfully. So yeah, that gunk can go in there, clog that up, And then in that scenario, you would have no pressure going to the ALDA, which is, I don't know the technical name behind all the letters, but it's calculating fueling based on altitude and boost reference. And you can delete that. Bensforce has a delete plug for that, and then you can get a little bit more power out of it. It feels a little bit more responsive, but you're really not gaining anything like you would with a complete built pump that's fine-tuned and calibrated. Another thing I'm running that's not Bensforce is this little bitty welded bracket to move this filter housing. I think it's, yeah, so it bolts here and factory bolts there, so it moves it over here to have room for this bigger filter. When I bought, let's see, so I'm running an 86356 CarQuest filter. When I bought the kit from Doomsday Diesel, there was this bracket and the little plug on there. Put the bracket on, put the plug on there, put the filter, or went to put the filter on. The filter did not clear. I had to machine the back of this with a Dremel and clean it up really good, and being careful not to get rid of too much material and cause it to be weak and break, because the filter would not go on and seal properly. It wouldn't even go on at all. Maybe like 1 or 2 turns and then it would hit and have a big old gap. And that is only to run the bigger filter. And also when changing these filters, you don't just grab the filter cartridge or canister itself and twist that off, because you'll never ever get it off. You always loosen this nut, and once this is loose, then you can spin this off. With the adapter from Doomsday Diesel, I've also ran into another issue. Not bashing him, just clearly going over what I've ran into. I put this on, threaded the filter, or threaded the insert into the filter, threaded it on like factory, and I was getting leak down, I guess you could say, where fuel was running back. Since then, I mean, I may have even installed it wrong for all I know, but I thought I did it correctly. Since then, I've taken the filter off, put a little bit of Loctite on that threaded adapter, put this all the way down, held the threaded adapter and tightened it down all the way, and then spun on the filter, so I don't have to worry about loosening this or having a slight void between that adapter and what goes up in here for the seal for proper fuel filtration and no leak down. Another thing I've ran into is these little lines. Whenever you're doing a swap and you're getting it turned on for the first time, you can loosen all the nuts to prime it like a normal older diesel, and you can not be careful and you can bump these, and then you'll have little bitty leaks, and then it could be sucking in air and getting into the system. So it's always a good idea to keep plenty of this stuff around. I bought maybe 20 feet from Bensforce to keep it in the truck, so if I'm ever somewhere it starts to run weird or whatever, I could just yank this stuff off, cut a new piece, slap it back on there, and be good to go and not have to worry about anything. And then keep a few of the pre-filters down there in the cab too, because those things can get kind of nasty and get all algae in them and stuff like that, or whatever, especially if you're running a fuel cell. Other than that, I think that's about it. We went over cooling, charging, power steering, glow plugs, a few maintenance things, charging, adapter plates, fueling, the turbo. So yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop a message, or you can always email us, find us on Facebook, or whatever you'd like to do, and we can try to help out as much as we possibly can. I've always liked Rangers, so that's why we chose the Ranger platform. And my buddy has a XJ with a 617 swapped into, and I just liked how it drove, liked the power. I liked being different than the same old, oh, just swap a Cummins or swap a 302 and silly old things like that that are just overplayed So that's why I chose to do the Mercedes route. All in all, realistically, if you're planning on doing a swap, to do it the right way, as in full rebuild, replacing all your hoses, seals, sleeves, rings, machine work, adapter plate, turbo, intercooler, radiator, hoses, fuel lines, modifications, engine mounts, the whole works, you can easily expect to pay $5,000, and that's with doing it yourself as well. I have at least that into my rig, and there's still more that I would like to do, but it's dependable. I can jump it in, drive 80 miles and not have a single issue, single hiccup, as long as I can keep fueling it. With the 35s, I got about 25 miles to the gallon. With the 37s, it's probably down to 20, 22 or something. Still drives great. Stays cool driving on the road. So yeah, stay tuned for more updates and more build progress. We still have yet to work on this. This is my brother's truck. We got to put a radiator in that and do a couple other odds and ends to it. Maybe build it up some, but yeah. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.